There's a kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep can cure, an exhaustion that's not in your muscles or your body, but somewhere deeper, darker, scarier to look at. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you woke up today feeling like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders all night, even though you don't remember doing anything at all. And the thought of facing another day, of answering another text, of smiling once more when someone asks how you are, seems to require energy that you simply no longer have. And what's more, the terrifying thing is that you can't pinpoint exactly what it is that's draining you like this, because your life, at least from the outside, isn't as hard as it could be. You're not carrying rocks or working 16-hour days in a factory, but you're still exhausted in a way that makes every breath feel like a conscious effort, every decision feel like an unclimbable mountain. And when you try to explain it to someone, the words sound weak, dramatic, as if you're making up excuses for not being productive, for not being able to keep up with the pace that everyone others seem to maintain effortlessly. And then you begin to wonder if the problem is not in your circumstances, but in yourself. If you are not simply weak, lazy, unable to cope with the normal life that everyone else seems to navigate so easily. And that question, this doubt about your own strength and worth, drains even more energy, creating a vicious cycle where you are tired of being tired, ashamed of not being able to explain why something as simple as existing seems so impossible today. And if you are feeling it now, if these words are touching something you can barely admit it to yourself, so subscribe to this channel now, because together we're going to explore something that Simone Weil, a philosopher who only lived 34 years but understood the weight of human existence with a clarity that few ever achieve, discovered about the true nature of this invisible exhaustion, about what's really robbing you of your energy when you're not paying attention. And what she found goes against everything the culture of productivity and toxic optimism teaches us about how to deal with fatigue. Because Weil doesn't offer productivity techniques or lists of how to have more energy. She offers something much more radical and much more truthful. She offers an explanation for why you are exhausted that finally makes sense, and a way to live with that tiredness that doesn't involve pretending it doesn't exist or hating yourself for feeling it. So stick with me, because in the next few minutes we are going to descend together to the bottom of this pit of inexplicable exhaustion. We are going to name what is draining you in silence, and we are going to find out what Simone Weil learned when she herself was crushed by fatigue so deep that it almost left her, completely destroyed. You've woken up, and before you even fully open your eyes, you've felt the weight. You can't even describe exactly what that weight is, but it's there, pressing on your chest, making the simple act of getting out of bed an internal negotiation that takes precious minutes that you don't have. And you look at the day that stretches ahead, and you don't see impossible tasks or insane schedules. You only see normality, banality, the same things you did yesterday and the day before yesterday. And yet the prospect of repeating all of this today seems to consume all your energy that you theoretically should have after 8 hours of sleep. And the most confusing thing is that you slept, you rested, you didn't do anything extraordinarily exhausting yesterday. But you woke up as if you had run a marathon during the night. And when you try to explain this to someone close to you, when you say, "I'm tired," the answer comes quickly and well-intentioned, but completely inappropriate. So rest more. Take a few days off. Maybe you need a vacation, and you want to shout that it's not that kind of tired. What a vacation will not solve. That you can sleep 12 hours and wake up even more exhausted, because the problem is not in the amount of rest, but in something deeper, more insidious, something that is draining you from the inside out while you pretend to be fine. And Simone Weil knew exactly this tiredness. She experienced this tiredness in the body, in the soul, in the Renault factories where she worked voluntarily to understand the suffering of the working class, where every day was a battle not just against physical work, but against something much worse, against the feeling that your soul was being systematically crushed, diminished, drained of everything that made her human. And she wrote about it with a brutal honesty that cuts through all the comforting lies we tell ourselves about why we are tired. She said that there is a kind of exhaustion that is not of the body, but of the soul, a tiredness steel that comes from living in constant contradiction with who you really are. from spending energy maintaining a performance of normality when inside you are falling apart, from smiling when you want to cry, from saying I'm fine when you are drowning. And this tiredness, this exhaustion of the soul, is infinitely more destructive than any physical fatigue because there is no amount of rest that can heal you, no amount of sleep that can restore what is being lost. Because what is being lost is not muscular strength or cellular energy. It is something much more precious and much more hard to regain. It's the essential vitality that makes you want to be alive, that makes waking up seem desirable rather than an obligation, that makes you look at the day with curiosity rather than terror. And when that vitality starts to leak, when you feel it slipping through your fingers, no matter how hard you try to hold it in, the tiredness that remains isn't just fatigue, it's despair, disguised as exhaustion. It's the soul screaming that something is deeply wrong. But you can't hear the scream because you're too busy pretending everything is fine, fulfilling your goals, obligations, keeping up appearances. And that's what's slowly killing you. Not the work itself, not the tasks or responsibilities, but the constant dissonance between who you really are and who you need to pretend to be to survive in the world as it's structured now. And here's the truth that no one wants to admit. The reason you're so tired is not because you're weak or lazy or doing something wrong. It's because you're expending an absurd amount of energy every single day simply to not feel what you're really feeling, to not think what you're really thinking, to not be who you really are. And Simone Weil called it the force of gravity, this constant pressure that pulls you down, that forces you to conform, to suppress any part of you that doesn't fit in perfectly into the machine of productivity and consumption that modern society has become. And resisting this gravity, maintaining your individuality, your sensitivity, your humanity, in a world that constantly tries to flatten you. This consumes an amount of energy that you don't even realize you are spending until one day you wake up and realize that there is nothing left. That you have become just a shell running on automatic, doing what needs to be done, but without any spark of real life inside. And the most insidious thing is that this drain happens in silence. It happens in the small moments that you don't even register as significant. It happens when you swallow an honest remark because it would be uncomfortable, when you force a smile you don't feel, when you feign interest in a conversation that deeply bores you, when you agree to something that goes against your deepest values because it's easier than confronting, when you repress a real emotion because there's no space or time to feel it right now. And each of these small acts of suppression, each micro-betrayal of yourself, drains a little more energy, and you don't even notice it because they are so small, so normal, so much a part of everyday life that you don't even question it. But at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, you realize that you are completely exhausted and you can't point to a single big event that explains why, because it wasn't one big event. It was 1,000 little murders of your soul that you committed against yourself without even realizing you were doing it. And Simone Weil saw it happening around her in the factories. She saw workers arrive on the first day with a sparkle in their eyes and hope in their hearts. And she saw that sparkle slowly fade, day by day, not because the work was physically impossible, but because something deeper was being destroyed, the sense that their lives had meaning, that they mattered as human beings rather than just as replaceable cogs in a machine. And she realized that this same process was happening everywhere, not just in factories, but in offices, in schools, in families. Everywhere, humans are forced to repress their essential humanity, to fit into systems that were designed without regard for what it means to be human, and the weariness you feel now as you read these. In other words, it is the accumulated result of countless moments in which you have been forced to be less than you are, to want less than you deserve, to feel less than you are feeling, and your body, your soul, is keeping score even if your conscious mind is not. And the score is showing that you are losing, that something precious is being sacrificed. And the weight of that loss is what you carry on your back when you wake up exhausted for no apparent reason. But let me tell you what Simone Weil discovered when she stopped trying to explain her tiredness or justify it or cure it and simply began to watching it with the same relentless attention she gave to everything in life, she realized that there are 3 specific ways in which life energy is silently drained. 3 invisible thieves who operate constantly but who are rarely named or recognized. And once you learn to see these thieves, once you can identify them operating in your own life, something fundamental changes, not necessarily your external situation, not necessarily the amount of things you need to do, but your relationship to tiredness, your understanding of why it exists and what he's trying to tell you. So let's go down together now. Let's go to the bottom of the pit where these thieves operate. Let's name them one by one. And let's find out what Simone Weil learned about how to live with that truth without being destroyed by it. Because what comes next is not comfortable. It's not comforting. It's not going to make you feel better right away. But it's going to make something more important. It's going to make you finally understand what's going on. And understanding, even when it's painful, is always better than confusion. Always better than blaming yourself for something. That it's not your fault. Always better than believing that you are the problem when in fact you are just responding completely rationally to an irrational situation. The first thief that is silently draining your energy is something that Simone Weil called divided attention. And before you think I'm talking about multitasking or digital distractions, let me explain that this goes much deeper and much more destructive than simply checking your phone too often. What Weil identified is that most of us live in a constant state of internal splitting, where part of you is doing what you need to do now, but another part is somewhere else entirely, worried about what you should have done yesterday, or anxious about what you need to do tomorrow, or judging what you're doing now as inadequate or insufficient. And this constant divide between where your body is and where your mind is, between what you're doing and what you think you should be doing. This perpetual fragmentation of your attention and energy is like having an engine running in 2 opposite directions at the same time, creating constant friction, wasted heat, accelerated wear and tear. And the result is that you end the day absolutely exhausted, having done much less than you thought, because you weren't actually fully present in anything you did. You were always partly elsewhere, always partly absent from her own life. And Weil discovered this in a visceral way when she worked in the factories. She realized that it was not the physical work itself that drained her so much, but the fact that even as she worked, her mind was divided. Part of her was making the necessary movements, but another part was watching the situation with philosophical horror. Another part was wondering how this could be the lives of millions of people. Another part was planning what she would write about it later. And this fragmentation, this impossibility of being completely present in the moment because the moment was so painful or so banal or so unsatisfying that she needed to escape it mentally, even while she was still in it physically. It left her more exhausted than any amount of manual labor could because internal division consumes energy exponentially. It's like trying to drive a car with a handbrake on. You're accelerating and braking simultaneously, and the result is massive wear and tear with no real movement. And you do it all the time. You wake up, and while you're showering, you're already thinking about everything you need to do today. And while you're drinking coffee, you're already worrying about whether you'll have time to get everything done. And while you're working, you're already thinking about what you're going to do when you finally have free time. And when you finally have free time, you're already feeling guilty for not doing something more productive. And so you go through the whole day, never completely present anywhere, always partially absent, always divided, always fragmented, and at the end of the day, you're exhausted. But you have the disturbing feeling that you haven't really experienced anything, that the day passed, but you weren't there. You were always one step ahead or a step back, always in another place mentally. And Simone Weil would say that this is not just inefficiency or poor time management. This is a form of violence against yourself. It is refusing to exist fully in the only moment you really have, which is now. It is spending energy keeping multiple versions of yourself operating simultaneously on different timelines. The version that is doing what needs to be done now. The version that is judging whether this is enough. The version that is worrying about the future. The version that is dwelling on the past. And keeping all these versions running at the same time drains you in a way that no amount of rest can restore. Because the problem is not lack of energy, but division of energy, fragmentation of energy, spraying of energy in 1,000 simultaneous directions. And you can sleep 12 hours, but wake up still exhausted. Because during sleep, your brain continued this job of keeping all versions of you going, continued processing all simultaneous timelines, continued trying to be everywhere but where you actually are, which is here, now, in this specific moment. And the most tragic thing is that while you are so busy being absent from the present is passing, your life is happening, unique and unrepeatable moments are unfolding, but you're not there to experience them because you're too busy worrying about them or judging them or comparing them to some impossible ideal of how they should be. And Weil realized that this divided attention isn't just a bad habit that we can just decide to stop. It's a symptom of something deeper. It's a sign that on some level, you don't want to be completely present in your life because your life as it is now is not what you want it to be. And then you split. Part of you attends because you need to, but part of you remains absent because total presence would be admitting that this is your life, this here, now, not some idealized future version, but exactly this. And this admission is so painful that you would rather spend enormous energy avoiding it, preferring to live partially in multiple imaginary realities rather than be fully present in this concrete reality. And that is what is draining you. Not the reality itself, but the refusal to fully inhabit it. The constant effort to be here physically, but elsewhere mentally. And Simone Weil tried something radical. She tried to be completely present, even when presence was painful. Especially when presence was painful. She practiced what she called pure attention, which is not forced concentration, but simply being completely where you are, completely doing what you are doing, completely feeling what you are feeling. No division, no fragmentation, no part of you already planning the next thing or judging the current thing, just total presence. And what she discovered was paradoxical. Total presence, even in a painful situation, consumes less energy than partial presence in a pleasant situation. Because total presence eliminates friction, eliminates the engine working against itself, eliminates the need to keep multiple versions of yourself operating simultaneously. And suddenly, there is only one version, one attention, one experience. And even though that experience is difficult, there is something deeply restorative about being completely in it instead of torn between it and 1,000 other things. And maybe, just maybe, part of your tiredness is not because your life is too hard, but because you are trying to live it only partially, always with one foot in and one foot out, always torn between accepting what is and wanting it to be. Be different, and that division, maintained day after day, year after year, drains you in a way that no productivity technique or energy hack can solve. Because the problem is not efficiency. The problem is that you are at war with yourself, and internal wars, even when silent, are the most exhausting of all. The second thief that is stealing your energy in silence is something that Simone Weil identified as the weight of unfulfilled expectations. And this is not about frustrated ambitions or unmet goals in the conventional sense. It is about something much more subtle and much more pervasive. It is about the fact that you wake up every day with implicit expectations about how the day should be, how you should feel, what you should be able to do, how other people should behave, how the world should work, and inevitably, because reality rarely conforms perfectly to expectations, there is a constant gap between what you expected and what is actually happening, and keeping that gap open, carrying that dissonance between expectation and reality. It drains energy in a massive but invisible way because it happens in the background. You don't even notice it consciously, but your nervous system notices it. Your soul notices it. And they keep track of this continuous and accumulating disappointment, and at the end of the day, you are exhausted not just by what happened, but by what didn't happen, by the distance between the day you imagined and the day you actually lived. And Simone Weil saw this operating in her own life in a brutal way. She had very high expectations for herself, expectations of intellectual genius, of social impact, of spiritual transformation, and the reality of her life with its constant headaches, its physical frailty, its human limitations, was always falling short of these expectations, always failing to be what she thought it should be, and carrying this gap, living in this perpetual dissonance between what she expected of herself and what she actually managed to be. It exhausted her more than any physical suffering could, because physical suffering you can accept, you can work with it, but disappointment with yourself, constant feeling of failing to be who you should be. It eats away at you inside so that there is no rest, because you carry this disappointment even in your sleep. It accompanies you at all times because you are your own parameter, and you are always falling short, always insufficient, always failing some impossible standard that you set yourself but can't reach, and you do this too. Every single day you wake up with expectations about yourself, expectations that you don't even consciously articulate, but that are there operating. You hope to wake up with energy. You hope to be productive. You hope to be patient with difficult people. You hope to feel motivated. You hope to be able to do everything you need to do and still have energy left for what you want to do. And when reality doesn't match, when you wake up tired or impatient or unmotivated or unable to do everything perfectly, there is disappointment. Subtle but constant, an implicit judgment that you are failing. And that judgment, multiplied by 1,000 little moments throughout the day, creates a sense of weight that you carry without even realizing you are carrying. A vague but persistent guilt that you don't measure up to some undefined but inflexible standard. And this is even worse when it comes to expectations of other people. You expect people to be reasonable. You expect them to recognize when you've made an effort. You expect them to live up to what you give. You expect them to understand without you having to explain. You expect the world is fair or at least coherent. And when those expectations are inevitably disappointed, when people act in ways you did not anticipate or approve of, when the world demonstrates its fundamental indifference to your wants and needs, you don't simply accept it as neutral information about the way things are. You carry it as weight, as additional evidence that something is wrong, that you are being mistreated, that life is not working out as it should, and keeping this constant mental inventory of all the ways in which reality is failing to live up to your expectations. This consumes an absurd amount of energy. It's like carrying around a huge list of grievances that you never resolve but also never let go of. And Simone Weil reached a point of exhaustion so deep that she was forced to do something radical. She began to practice what she called consent to reality, which is not passive resignation, but active acceptance that things are as they are, not as you would like them to be. And that meant letting go of expectations, all of them, waking up without expectations of how the day should be, working without expectations of recognition, loving without expectations of reciprocity, existing without expectation that the universe will behave according to your preferences and counterintuitively. She discovered that this practice didn't leave her more exhausted, but less so, because suddenly she was no longer wasting energy. Maintaining this constant inventory of disappointments, she was no longer incessantly comparing what is with what should be. She was simply dealing with what is, and there is a surprising lightness to that, a massive saving of energy, because you stop fighting reality itself and start working with it, and perhaps part of your inexplicable tiredness is exactly that. You are exhausted not by the things that happen, but by the constant resistance to them, by the invisible but Herculean work of maintaining expectations about how everything should be different. And this resistance operates all the time. It's like walking with muscles permanently contracted against something that will not give. And you may not consciously realize that you are doing this, but your body notices, your energy notices, and at the end of the day, the result is deep exhaustion that no external explanation can justify because the real cause is not external, it's internal. It's the invisible work of carrying unfulfilled expectations, like stones on your back, and the longer you live like this, the heavier the stones become, because each new frustrated expectation adds to the collection. Each new disappointment adds to the inventory, and eventually, you are carrying such a weight that waking up already feels like a Herculean task, because you know that you will spend the whole day accumulating more weight, more frustrated expectations, more evidence that you, or the world, or both, are failing to be what they should be. And Simone Weil tried something that seems impossible. She tried to live one day at a time without projecting expectations onto it. She tried to accept each person exactly as they were without expecting them to change or improve or respond. And what she thought they should be, she tried to welcome her own life, with all its limitations and pains and imperfections, as if it were a gift rather than a problem to be fixed, and it wasn't easy. She failed at it again and again, but each time she succeeded, even for a few moments, there was a deep relief, a feeling that a huge weight had been placed on the floor. And maybe you need to do the same. Maybe you need to start noticing how many expectations you carry about how today should be, about how you should feel, about what you should be able to do, about how people should behave. And maybe you need to ask, very gently, if it is possible to let go of some of those expectations. Not because you give up wanting things to get better, but because you recognize that carrying unfulfilled expectations is invisible work that is slowly killing you. And that maybe, just maybe, there is a way of living that is lighter, because it is based on accepting what is, instead of constantly fighting against what is not. And that doesn't mean you stop trying to make things better. It just means you stop wasting energy. By resisting reality while trying to change it, you work with what is instead of against what should be. And this subtle change in orientation can make a huge difference in how much weight you carry and how exhausted you feel at the end of each day. But before we explore how to make this change in orientation, there is still a third energy thief that needs to be named. And this is perhaps the most insidious of all because it operates so deeply in the unseen that most people never even realize it exists. And once they discover what it is, many things about their inexplicable tiredness will finally make sense in a way they never did before. But before I reveal this third thief, I need to pause and hear from you. Where are you watching this video right now? From which part of the world are you looking for answers to this tiredness that no one else seems to understand? Leave your city, your country in the comments, because there is something deeply comforting in knowing that around the planet there are others like you who also feel this invisible weight, who also wake up exhausted for no apparent reason, who are also trying to understand what is stealing their energy in silence. And maybe Simone Weil, wherever she is now, would be smiling to know that her observations about human exhaustion continue to help people decades after her death. People like you who have had the courage to admit that something is not right and who want to understand what it is. So tell me, from where you watch us, and then together we will explore this third energy thief. And I promise that when you see what it is, when you can finally name this thing that has been operating in the shadows of your life, something will change. Not necessarily your external situation, but your understanding of what is happening. And understanding, even when painful, is always the first step to transformation. The third thief that is silently draining your energy is something that Simone Weil called the violence of need. And this requires careful explanation because we are not talking about basic physical needs like food or shelter. We are talking about something much deeper and much more destructive. We are talking about how you have been conditioned to believe that you need certain things to be worthy, to be loved, to have value, to have a right to exist. And this conditioning operates so deeply that you don't even notice it. You just feel the constant pressure of having to be more, do more, achieve more, prove more, because on some fundamental level, you have internalized the belief that who you are now, how you are now, is not enough. You need to add something, achieve something, become something different before you deserve rest, acceptance, love. And this unarticulated but deeply ingrained belief forces you to live in a constant state of chase, always running after something that will finally make you enough. And what makes this so exhausting is not the race itself, but the fact that destiny keeps moving, every time, that you achieve something that you thought would make you enough. The bar moves, you discover that it is still not enough, there is still something missing, and then you start running again, and it goes on because the fundamental premise is wrong. The idea that you need to earn your own dignity is wrong. But you have been conditioned so deeply to believe this that questioning that belief seems dangerous. It seems like laziness or giving up, when in fact it is sanity. When in fact it is recognition of a basic truth about human existence that our culture works tirelessly to make us forget, that you are already worthy. You already have value, not because of anything you effaced or conquered, but simply because it exists. And Simone Weil saw this violence operating everywhere. She saw it in the factory workers who internalized the belief that their value as humans depended on their productivity, that if they didn't produce enough, they didn't deserve pay, respect, even existence. She saw it in herself when she judged herself mercilessly for not being able to do everything she thought she should do, for not being as brilliant as her mathematician brother, for not being able to work through pain when headaches paralyzed her. And she realized that this internalization of the need to constantly prove yourself was not only psychologically damaging, but spiritually destructive, because it turned your entire existence into performance, into a constant test that you could never pass definitively. There was always another test needed, another standard to be reached before you could finally rest in the certainty of your own worth. Except that rest never came, because the system is designed to ensure that it never comes. Because if you rested, if you stopped running, if you accepted that you are enough as you are, you would stop being useful to others. A system that depends on your perpetual dissatisfaction with yourself to keep functioning, and you feel it operating in your own life even if you've never thought of it in those terms. You feel it in the guilt that appears when you take a day of rest without having accomplished something first. You feel it in the anxiety that arises when you're not being productive. You feel it in the inner voice that constantly asks you what you did today, what you accomplished, how you moved closer to becoming someone worthy of respect and recognition, and that voice is never satisfied. No matter how much you do, there is always more you could have done. There is always evidence that you didn't try hard enough, weren't disciplined enough, weren't good enough. And keeping this constant vigilance over your own worth, this perpetual judgment of whether you've done enough to deserve to exist today, it drains an amount of energy that's hard to even measure because it's so constant, so omnipresent, so normalized that you don't even realize you're doing it. You just feel the result, the deep exhaustion of never being able to simply be, of always having to be, conquering, proving, justifying your existence through performance. And the cruelest thing is that when you are too exhausted to perform, when tiredness finally forces you to stop, there is additional guilt because now you are not just failing to achieve more, you are failing to even maintain the bare minimum, and that guilt consumes additional energy, creating vicious cycle where you are tired of trying to prove your worth, but also guilty for being tired, because being tired means you are not proving yourself enough. And there is no way out of this cycle as long as you accept the fundamental premise of that her value needs to be earned rather than simply recognized as inherent in her existence. And Simone Weil struggled with this her entire life. She could never completely escape the belief that she needed to do more, be more, contribute more to justify her place in the world. But she had moments of clarity where she saw the insanity of it, where she realized that she was slowly killing herself, trying to prove something that should never need proving, that she was already worthy, already had value, not because of her philosophy or her activism or her intellect, but simply because she was human, simply because she existed. And in those moments of clarity, she experienced something she described as grace, a sudden lightness where all the weight of having to prove her worth just fell away, where she could just be, just exist, just breathe without turning, even breathing into a performance that needed to be judged. And those moments were rare and brief, but they showed her that there was another way to exist, a way that didn't require this constant, exhaustive vigilance over her own worth, a way that didn't turn every action into a test of her dignity. And maybe you too. If you've had moments like that, rare moments where suddenly you weren't judging yourself, you weren't measuring your worth, you weren't comparing your performance to some impossible standard, moments where you were simply alive, and that was enough. And if you've had those moments, even if they only lasted seconds, You know how different the quality of energy is in those moments, how light it is to exist when you're not carrying the weight of having to constantly prove that you deserve to exist. And the invitation here is not to abandon ambitions or stop trying to make things better. The invitation is to question whether do you really need to earn your own worth? Or maybe, just maybe, do you already have value simply by existing? And if you can begin to operate from that premise instead of the premise that you need to prove something before you deserve rest, acceptance, love, because as long as you operate from the second premise, you will always be exhausted, always running, always insufficient, no matter how much you achieve, because the premise itself guarantees that you will never arrive, that you will never be enough, that you will never deserve to finally stop and rest in the simple dignity of your existence. And Simone Weil would say that recognizing this is not giving up, it is waking up, isn't it? Laziness, it's sanity. It's not denying the need to work or contribute, but it's refusing to turn your entire existence into a performance where your worth is constantly on trial. And maybe the tiredness you feel, the tiredness that won't go away no matter how much sleep you get, whether it's your body, your soul, screaming that you can't go on living like this, that something fundamental needs to change. Not in your circumstances, but in your relationship to your own existence, in your understanding of who you are and why you matter. And maybe that scream is getting louder precisely because you're reaching the limit, to the point where either you change something fundamental or something fundamental will break. And it's scary to be at that point. It's scary to feel like you can't go on as you are, but also don't know what it would be like to live differently. But that fear, that feeling of being on the edge of something, maybe that's exactly where you need to be to finally question the beliefs that have been silently draining you for so long. The beliefs about what you need to achieve before you're worthy of existing. The beliefs about how much you need to do before you're entitled to rest. The beliefs about who you need to become before you're worthy of being. Love and acceptance and questioning these beliefs is not easy, because they are intertwined with everything you have been taught about success, value, purpose. But Simone Weil would tell you that questioning is necessary. It is urgent. It is perhaps the only thing that can really change your relationship with the fatigue you carry. Because as long as you believe that you need to earn your value, you will always be exhausted by the attempt. But if you can see, even for a moment, that your value already exists, that you are already worthy simply by being alive, then suddenly there is the possibility of a different kind of existence, an existence that does not require this constant drain of energy, trying to prove something that should never need proving. And perhaps now, having named these three energy thieves who operate in silence, divided attention, unfulfilled expectations, and violence of the need to prove worth, perhaps now you can begin to see why you are so tired. Not because you are weak or because there is something wrong with you, but because you are fighting an invisible war on multiple fronts, a war against the fragmentation of your attention, against the dissonance between expectation and reality, against the belief that you need to earn your own worth, and no one can fight that war indefinitely without eventually collapsing from exhaustion. And maybe your tiredness is not a problem, but a symptom, not a weakness, but a message. Not something you need to overcome, but something you need to finally hear and understand. Because your body, your soul, is trying to tell you something crucial, is trying to tell you that you cannot go on like this, that something needs to change, not in your external circumstances, but in how you relate to your own existence. And that is what we are going to explore now, as Simone Weil learned to living with this exhaustion without being destroyed by it. How she developed practices that didn't eliminate the exhaustion, but fundamentally changed her relationship with it. And these practices are not easy. They are not quick. They are not going to make you wake up tomorrow feeling completely restored, but they can start to change something deep. They can start to create fissures in the beliefs that have been draining you. They can start to make room for a different kind of existence, an existence that doesn't require this constant hemorrhaging of energy. And that's where we're going now, into the difficult but necessary territory of how live when you finally understand what is silently killing you. And here's where Simone Weil's thinking becomes radically different from any self-help or pop psychology, because she doesn't offer techniques for more energy or productivity hacks or 5 steps to overcome fatigue. What she offers is something much deeper and much more difficult. She offers a mindfulness practice that reveals truths about her existence that are painful but liberating. And the first truth she discovered when she finally stopped fighting her own fatigue and started observing it with pure attention is that fatigue was teaching her something essential. It was showing exactly where she was living in contradiction with who she really was, where she was betraying herself to conform to external or internal expectations, where she was wasting energy trying to be someone she wasn't rather than simply being who she was. And that revelation came not as a sudden insight, but as a gradual, painful recognition that emerged from the daily practice of sitting with the tiredness, of not trying to explain it or justify it or cure it, but simply observing it with the same quality of attention you would give to a suffering friend. No judgment, no rush to fix, just total presence to what is. And what Weil discovered through this practice is that when you stop fighting the tiredness and just be with it, completely present with it, something starts to reveal itself. You start to see the patterns. You start to notice when exactly the energy drains, in what specific situations, doing what specific activities, with which specific people. And these observations are not abstract, but concrete and specific. You notice that your energy drains when you are in conversations where you have to feign interest, when you are doing work that you don't have, when you're with people who demand that you be an edited version of yourself instead of accepting who you really are, when you're maintaining relationships that are dead but that you're keeping alive out of guilt or obligation or fear. And each of these observations is like turning on a light in a dark corner. Suddenly you can see what was draining you that you couldn't see before because you were too busy trying to function through exhaustion instead of questioning why you were exhausted. And Weil called this practice pure attention. And it's harder than it seems because it requires you to resist the natural urge to immediately try to change or fix what you observe. You just observe, you just notice, you just allow the truth to reveal itself without immediately trying to do something about it. And this restraint, this ability to simply see without immediately acting, goes against everything we've been taught about productivity and efficiency. But Weil has found that it's essential, because if you act too quickly, if you try to fix it before you really understand, you just create new ways of draining energy, new self-improvement projects that become just more weight to carry. But if you can simply observe, simply be present with the tiredness without judgment or rush, eventually the tiredness itself begins to reveal its purpose, begins to show you what needs to change, not through a 5-step plan, but through gradual recognition of where you are living in betrayal of yourself, where you are spending energy maintaining a life that is not really yours, where you are conforming to expectations that you have never consciously agreed to accept. And that recognition is painful because it forces you to see how many choices you made that were not really yours. How many parts of your life you are living on automatic, following a script that someone has written for you without you realizing it. How many masks you wear that have become so habitual that you have forgotten they are masks and have started to think they are your real face. And seeing all of this takes courage because it means admitting that maybe you don't know who you really are. That maybe the person you have been is not the person you really are, but just a collection of conditioned responses to external expectations. And that admission is terrifying, because if you are not who you thought you were, then who you are, and where do you begin to discover who you really are when you've spent so long being who you thought you should be? But Simone Weil would say that this terror, this fear of looking honestly at yourself, is exactly what keeps you stuck in exhaustion. Because while you're afraid to see the truth, you keep spending enormous energy keeping up the lies, keeping up the masks, keeping up the performance. And only when you finally have the courage to stop the performance, to take off the masks, to look honestly at what's left when you stop trying to be who you think you should be, only then can you begin to discover who you really are and discover who you really are. It's not a comfortable or comforting process. It's not a journey of enlightened self-discovery where you encounter some idealized version of yourself that's always been waiting to emerge. It's a process more like sculpting, where you peel away layers and layers of conditioning and expectations and masks and defenses until you finally arrive at something real, something that wasn't manufactured to please or impress or conform, something that simply is. And that something may be very different from what you imagined. It may be simpler, quieter, more ordinary than you'd like. It may not be special or extraordinary in ways you have been taught to value, but it has a quality that all what masks don't have. It has the quality of being real, of being truly you, and living from that real place, instead of from the masks. That fundamentally changes how much energy you expend, because suddenly you're no longer maintaining an elaborate performance. You're no longer expending energy being someone you're not. You're simply being who you are, and being who you really are, no matter how simple or imperfect that may be, takes infinitely less energy than trying to be who you think you should be. And that's the second truth that Simone Weil discovered through From Attention to Tiredness. That authenticity is not a luxury or an abstract philosophical ideal, but a practical necessity for survival. Because inauthenticity drains energy in a way that eventually kills you, perhaps not literally, but metaphorically, kills the part of you that is really alive, that really feels, that really desires and loves and suffers, and leaves just a shell running on automatic, doing what needs to be done but with no real vitality. And if that describes how you feel right now, if you feel like you are just functioning but not really living, if you feel like there is an outer shell that interacts with the world but an interior that is empty or dormant or dead, so perhaps the tiredness you feel is not a problem, but a symptom. A symptom that some essential part of you is being systematically denied, suffocated, kept silent, and that part is rebelling in the only way it can, through exhaustion that forces you to stop, that makes it impossible to continue maintaining the performance, that creates crisis, that finally forces you to question whether you can really continue living like this. And Weil would say that this crisis is not collapse, but awakening, not the end, but beginning. It is not evidence of weakness, but a call for courage. Courage to look honestly at your life and ask how many parts of it are really yours and how many parts of it you are living because you didn't know how to refuse, because you were afraid of what would happen if you said no, because you internalized the belief that your real needs and desires are less important than keeping the peace or meeting expectations or not disappointing people. And this question has no easy answer. It cannot be answered in a day or a week. It is a question that you need to carry and revisit repeatedly. A question that gradually reveals truths uncomfortable about how many choices you made that weren't really choices but capitulations. How many times you said yes when you wanted to say no. How many times you betrayed yourself to avoid conflict or disapproval or loneliness. And seeing it is painful, but seeing it is also freeing, because for the first time you can begin to understand why you are so tired, not because there is something wrong with you, but because you are living life that requires you to be someone you are not, and no one can do that indefinitely without eventually collapsing from exhaustion. So maybe the tiredness is exactly what it should be, a sign that you've reached your limit, that you can no longer continue betraying yourself, that something fundamental needs to change, and that change can't be superficial. It can't just be adjusting your schedule or taking a vacation or adding more self-care. It needs to be profound change in how you relate to your own existence, which voices you choose to listen to, on what basis you make decisions about your life. And that change is scary because it means potentially disappointing people, potentially changing things that seem to be working well from the outside, potentially choosing paths that others won't understand or approve. But Simone Weil lived this change in her own life in radical ways. She refused a safe academic path to work in factories and understand the suffering of workers. She refused middle-class comfort to live in solidarity with the poor. She even refused baptism in the church she loved because she could not accept exclusion that came with belonging to a specific tradition. And these choices did not make her life easier or more comfortable. She died young, in poverty, with much of her work unpublished, but she died having lived with integrity, having made choices that were true to who she was, really was, instead of who others expected her to be. And there is dignity in that goes beyond comfort or success. There is quality of life actually lived rather than just performed. And maybe you don't need to make such radical choices as Weil did. Maybe your needed changes are more subtle, more incremental, but they still require the same kind of courage. Courage to look honestly at where you are betraying yourself and start slowly to stop doing that. To start saying no when you really mean no. To start choosing based on what you really want. Instead of what you think you should want, start allowing who you really are emerges even if it is different from who you have built yourself to be. And this does not happen all at once. There is no moment of sudden transformation where everything changes. It is a gradual process of small, less frequent betrayals, small, more honest choices, small moments of authenticity where before there was only performance, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, you begin to notice that there is more energy, not because you are sleeping more or eating better or doing yoga, but because you are spending less energy maintaining masks, less energy living in contradiction with yourself, even less energy trying to be someone you're not. And this regained energy isn't dramatic. It won't make you suddenly want to conquer the world. It's more subtle. It's energy simply to be alive, to be present, to find moments of lightness or pleasure or real connection that you had forgotten were possible when you were so exhausted that just surviving was a Herculean task. And maybe that's enough. Maybe regaining energy simply to be alive instead of just functioning is all you really need. Not to be extraordinary or accomplish great things, but just to live your ordinary life in a way that is truly yours. In a way that doesn't require constant betrayal of who you are, in a way that allows for moments of simplicity and presence and even joy that are impossible when you are so exhausted that everything is just a task to be accomplished. And Simone Weil doesn't promise that this will be easy. She doesn't promise that she will solve everything. She just testifies that it is possible, that there is a way to live with less exhaustion when you stop wasting energy maintaining a life that isn't really yours. And this testimony, coming from someone who suffered deeply but lived authentically, it has weight that no motivational promise has because it's not offering magical healing or instant transformation. It's offering dignity in the midst of struggle. It's offering the possibility of carrying your life with a little less weight when you stop also carrying all the lives you think you should be living, all the selves you think you should be, all the expectations that were never really yours. And letting go of that is not giving up. It's waking up. It's not failure. It's sanity. It's not losing your life. It's finally starting to live it. But let me be honest about something that Simone Weil was also honest about. Recognizing these energy thieves, practicing paying attention to tiredness, starting to let go of masks and living more authentically. None of this will make you wake up tomorrow feeling completely renewed. None of this is a quick cure, because there is no quick cure for something that has been built up over years or decades of conditioning and betrayal of yourself. What there is practice. Daily practice of noticing when you are dividing attention and gently bringing it back. Practice of letting go of expectations about how the day should be and accepting the day as it is. The practice of questioning when you are doing something to prove value rather than simply because it makes sense to do it. And these practices are not glamorous. They will not generate inspiring posts on social media. They are small, almost invisible. Moments of different choice that no one else will notice but that you will feel. And gradually these small choices begin to accumulate. They begin to create a different pattern. They begin to open up space where before there was only compression. And in that space, something can start to breathe. Something that was suffocated can start to move. And you will not wake up transformed. But you may begin to notice moments, just moments at the beginning, where there is lightness that wasn't there before, where there is energy that you didn't expect to have, where there is an ability to be present that you had forgotten was possible. And these moments are precious, not because they are extraordinary, but because they are real, because they are genuine, because they happen when you are not trying to force them or produce them, but simply because you have created conditions where they can emerge naturally. And Simone Weil would say that these moments of grace, as she called them, cannot be earned or deserved. They simply happen when you stop blocking your own ability to receive them. When you let go enough of performance and resistance and the need to control everything to allow something beyond your will to come in. And that takes a different kind of courage than the courage to do or achieve. It takes courage not to do, not to control, to simply be open to what comes. And for people who have spent a lifetime trying to control everything to ensure security or acceptance or value, that courage to let go of control is terrifying. Because if you let go of control, that guarantees that something good will happen, which prevents everything from falling apart. And the honest answer is that nothing guarantees. There are no guarantees. You can let go of control and still suffer. Oh, you can never fail, still be rejected or hurt or disappointed. But what Weil discovered is that you will suffer anyway. The question is not whether you will suffer, but how you will suffer. Whether you will suffer while trying to control everything and exhaust yourself in the process, or whether you will suffer while being open to what is, present to what happens. And paradoxically, the second type of suffering, even though it is suffering, consumes less energy because you are not also suffering against the suffering. You are not also adding layers of resistance and denial and trying to control the uncontrollable. You simply are with what is. And there is massive energy savings in that. There is dignity in that. There is even strange peace in that. Not peace of everything being okay, but peace of you being willing to be completely present to what is, even when what is painful. And this willingness to be present to what is, including tiredness, including pain, including confusion and fear and uncertainty, is perhaps the most radical practice that Simone Weil offers. And it is a practice that goes against everything that modern culture teaches about avoiding discomfort and seeking pleasure and optimizing everything. But it is practice that she discovered through her own experience to be the only thing that really allowed her to live with the weight of human existence without being completely crushed by it. So maybe the practices you need are not complicated. Maybe they are simply that. Waking up and before you pick up the phone or start the day, take 5 minutes to notice where your attention is, whether it is divided between multiple concerns or whether you can bring it back to simply being here now, and when you realize that you are carrying expectations about what the day should be like, gently ask if you can let go of some of those expectations and simply accept the day as it comes. And when you realize that you are doing something to prove yourself rather than because it makes sense to do it, pause and ask if you can do it differently, or maybe not do it at all. And when you feel tiredness creeping in, instead of immediately judging or trying to push through it, simply notice where exactly the tiredness is, what was happening when it came up, what it might be trying to tell you. And these practices are simple but not easy because they require you to go against lifelong conditioning. They require you to choose presence over productivity, authenticity, instead of approval, being instead of doing. And these choices will cost you something. They will cost approval from some people. They will cost the feeling of always being in control. They will cost the illusion that you can be perfect if you just try hard enough. But what you get is life that is truly yours. It is energy to live that life instead of just surviving it. It is moments of true presence and connection instead of constant performance. And Simone Weil lived these choices until their ultimate consequences. She chose authenticity, even when it cost her academic career. She chose presence over suffering. Even when it was easier to look the other way, she chose to live according to her values, even when it led to poverty and hardship. And yes, she died young. Yes, she suffered a lot. But she truly lived. She lived with integrity. She lived in such a way that in the end she didn't have to look back and wonder if she lived someone else's life instead of her own. And maybe that's all that really matters. Not how long you live or how comfortable your life is, but if you truly lived. If you were true to who you really were. If you had the courage to let go the masks and allow your real life, with all its imperfections and limitations, to finally emerge. And if that sounds impossible where you are now, if you feel like you are too trapped, too conditioned, too exhausted to make these changes, remember that you don't have to do it all at once. You don't need radical transformation tomorrow. You just need to start noticing, start paying attention, start making different small choices when opportunities appear, and trust that these small choices, accumulated over time, can create change that seems impossible now, but that one day you will look back and realize that it happened, not through willpower or Herculean discipline, but through gentle, repeated choices to be a little more present, a little more honest, a little more yourself. And if you felt that something changed within you during the time we spent together here, if some truth resonated with a deep part of you that you barely knew existed, then leave a like on this video, because it shows me that these words are reaching those who really need them, those who have the courage to honestly look at what is draining energy. Instead of continuing to pretend that everything is fine, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together, because there are others who are. They are also tired, they are also questioning, they are also looking to live more truthfully, and you don't have to do it alone. There is a community of people who are willing to look honestly at these difficult questions, and together we can create space where it is possible to be more real, more vulnerable, more human. And now we come to the end of this journey together, and I want you to know that if you've made it this far, if you've stuck with me through these hard words and these uncomfortable truths, it says something profound about you. It says that you have courage that most people don't have. Courage to look honestly at what hurts instead of continuing to avoid it. Courage to question instead of accepting. Courage to seek truth even when truth isn't comforting. And Simone Weil would say that that courage is rare and precious, that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Exactly the kind of honest self-examination you just did. And there is dignity in that. There is value in that. Not because it will make you special or extraordinary, but because it will make you real. It will make you live more truly. It will make you stop wasting precious energy, maintaining masks and performances that were never really you, and the tiredness you feel. This inexplicable weight that brought you here, maybe it is not the enemy, but the messenger. Maybe it is your soul trying to tell you that you cannot continue living in contradiction with yourself, that something needs to change, not your feelings, external circumstances necessarily, but your relationship with your own existence, your willingness to be who you really are instead of who you think you should be. And this change does not happen all at once. There is no magical moment of transformation. It is a gradual process of small, more honest choices, small moments of greater presence, small refusals to betray yourself. And these moments accumulate, create a different pattern. Open space where before there was only compression. And in that space, something can finally breathe. Something essential that was suffocated can begin to move again. And you will not wake up transformed, but you may begin to notice moments where there is lightness that wasn't there before, where there is genuine energy instead of just willpower, where there is the ability to be present to your life instead of just surviving it. And those moments are everything. They are real life happening. They are what you were looking for when you started to question why you are so tired. And Simone Weil, who lived only 34 years but understood the weight of human existence with a clarity few achieve, she would say that you are not alone in this, that this tiredness you carry is shared by countless others who you are also living in a world that demands that you be less than you are, that you are also carrying the weight of unfulfilled expectations and divided attention and the need to constantly prove yourself, and recognizing this does not lessen your pain but perhaps makes it more bearable to know that you are not alone, that there are others who understand, that there is a tradition of people like Simone Weil who have looked honestly at these issues and found not cure but dignity, not escape but presence, not solution but way of living with what is, without being completely destroyed by it. So keep looking, keep questioning, keep going, making small, more honest choices when opportunities arise, because that's exactly what Simone Weil would do. She wouldn't give up. She wouldn't pretend that everything is okay when it isn't. She would continue to look honestly at what is, fully feeling what she feels, living as truly as possible within the limitations that exist. And there is strange freedom in that. Freedom that comes not from not having limitations, but from stopping pretending that they don't exist. Freedom to finally let go of all the versions of yourself that you never were but tried to be, and simply be who you are, tired and imperfect, and limited and yet worthy, yet valuable, yet worthy of living the life that is truly yours.